Emma, how are you going?
I'm very well, thanks, Dyl. How are you?
Really well, thank you. Thank you so much for joining us today in this little mini-series. Thanks to Tackle Your Feelings. It's something that we've been wanting to do for a long time, and I really appreciate you making the trek down or up, across,
I think I say up, but I don't know that that's accurate. It's just because it looks up on the map.
Yes, from Tasmania. Beautiful Tasmania, beautiful Hobart.
Yes, I love it down there.
I love it too. Battery Point.
My financial situation doesn't allow me to live in Battery Point, but I do live in beautiful Richmond, which is a little historic town about 20 minutes out of Hobart. Would recommend. Give it a shout out.
I've heard it. No, the only reason I say Battery Point is I've been to Hobart before and I walked around and some of those old pubs and stuff. It just feels like you're there from like 100 years ago. I love that they've kept that sort of historic feel to them.
Yeah, it is a really nice place to go down and visit. Lots of good restaurants in there.
Yes.
But expensive housing market in that area.
Hobart's killing it. One other thing that has completely nothing to do with what we're talking about today, but you'll find that I do a lot. There's one other place, Hanging Garden. Have you ever been there?
Yeah.
I'm sure you have.
Very popular.
You DJ there sometimes, don't you?
Yeah, just a side hustle that I have.
Em, how would you explain who you are and how you got involved with Tackle Your Feelings?
Good question. So obviously I'm Emma Richardson, always been in Hobart, and probably when the Tackle Your Feelings program first came out a few years ago now, I saw it advertised and I was like, sick, yeah. This combines two of my favourite things, footy and mental health. Obviously as a psychologist, I was already in that domain, and I've been a passionate AFL supporter for a really long time. And I was like, great, I'm going to apply. You had to upload like a little video of yourself, which was fun. And then I submitted it, and then they came out and said, we're not rolling it out in Tassie in the first year. So I was like, cool. Okay, good. And then the second year they rolled it out in Tassie, and I got involved with the program through being one of the psychologists who delivers the workshops out in the community. And then last year, towards the end of last year, they advertised for the program psychologist position, who is the person who kind of runs the program more broadly and supports the psychologists in the network around the country to deliver the program and writes new content and that type of thing. So I thought I'd have a crack at applying for that, and then was successful in getting the job, and I've been in the role since mid-Jan.
So cool.
Yeah.
For someone that hasn't heard of Tackle Your Feelings, and I'm extremely passionate about Tackle Your Feelings, I've been an ambassador since the beginning. I've been so lucky to travel around Australia, really providing workshops and being a part of it with qualified psychologists in the community aspect as well. So that you've got both, people from lived experience versus actual professionals that you can go to and chat to. How would you explain to someone that hasn't heard of before what Tackle Your Feelings is, and if they wanted to get it a part of their footy club or netball club in the future?
Yeah. So Tackle Your Feelings is, I would say, a preventative mental health program that is rolled out across football clubs and now more recently netball clubs as well, which is really exciting, all over Australia from, kind of grassroots level all the way up. And the program teaches people how to understand mental health. So what is it? It also teaches how to recognise, so what are the signs and symptoms of mental health, particularly if I might be struggling, and then what to do, so how to respond. And that involves a lot of the time having a conversation. So if you see someone, you notice one of these signs or symptoms, it's about kind of pulling them aside and having a chat, checking in, and then maybe linking in with some extra support for them as well.
Absolutely perfect response. Couldn't have put it better myself. I love these workshops, and as I said, I've been to many of them now, and sometimes I feel like I'm doing the same thing, but every time I take something new away, even for myself, which is really cool. So I couldn't recommend this to anyone more, to get it involved in their local community sports club. Really lucky as well with this collaboration with Teach Me Please and Tackle Your Feelings to bring this little mini-series together of thinking traps, and I love the idea. We're going to be going through 5 levels of little thinking traps throughout this series, which we'll release weekly. Just little tidbits. They'll be short and sweet, but punch with some takeaways that you can actually do to improve yourself, or recognise, as we said, and respond to signs of mental health, and just little things that we do every day that we might not know can really improve our lives. First one, catastrophizing.
Yes, catastrophizing. So probably a lot of people will have heard of this term
I've heard
before.
of it.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I've heard of it.
Do you do it?
We were chatting off air before, and you're like, "Oh, here's some examples." I was like, "So, what? When I try and call my mum and she doesn't answer, and I think she's dead." You're like, "Yeah, that's that." I was like, "Oh, what about when the episodes are low on the podcast, and I think that we're gonna have to close a business the next day?" You're like, "Yeah, that's probably it." I was like, "Well, I'm gonna listen to this one."
Yeah, 100%. They are perfect examples of catastrophizing. So catastrophizing is all about when we blow things out of proportion and we see kind of things as being terrible or awful or horrible, when maybe the reality is that actually it's not quite as bad as what our mind is telling us. So they're really great examples with yours, and I think probably some that a lot of people can relate to that. Why aren't they answering the phone? What's gone wrong? What's happened? And it's not just a kind of, maybe they're busy or what have you. It's really going to that worst case scenario. They've had a car crash. They're dead. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, you can imagine what happens to your emotions following that type of thinking. We start to feel anxious and panicked, and that might impact our behaviour as well. So we might be calling. We might call someone else, try and find out what's going on.
Yeah, I think it's like there's so many scales to it too. Obviously, the mum phone call, dead one. We do somewhat say that in a light sense, but like I do experience those thoughts. And as I've gotten older, I can learn to sort of understand that a little bit more. And I'd love to ask you, like, why we actually do catastrophize in a moment. But the other one, even on a lesser scale, you can sort of say maybe on, living and passing away, is a work situation. So they don't have to be life or death situation. We can catastrophize about anything. And even little work things I find can grow from such a small thing into this big thing that then I'm overthinking, I'm doing, and no one else around me knows that this is going on because it's just living in my head of all these situations that could occur but probably won't.
Yeah, 100%. It's like me coming onto this podcast and going, oh, God, my boss is going to see this and he's going to be like, wow, she's really bad. She doesn't know what she's talking about. And then I'm fired.
Yeah.
That's that thinking pattern that we can kind of go straight to. And if we don't notice, we're not that tuned into the way that we're thinking or paying attention, we can just start to feel really anxious, for example, and be like, I don't even know why. But it's this thought that's kind of underlying that's led to the anxiety.
Yeah, it's exactly right, like trying to catch it out early. I just want to tell you one more that I had around the work stuff. This is where it gets to with me sometimes. I was thinking about it, on that work front. I was like, okay, so the pod doesn't go well. You don't do that. We're probably going to have to get a new building. We might have to let go of some people. They might then sue me. Then I'll probably go to jail. I won't be able to see my son ever again. We'll have a bad relationship growing up because I'll be in jail. Mum will hate me. We'll probably get divorced. So you can see, it just goes into the weirdest places ever.
Yeah.
And I'm like, what happened from one podcast? No one listened. Now I'm going to jail and divorced and don't have a relationship with my son anymore.
Yeah, 100%. You can see the spiral that's come from that. And then one minute you're feeling anxious because you're like, no one's listening. And then the next you're feeling depressed because you're never going to see your son again, and your relationship's going to be torn apart.
It does happen. I do find myself in these situations a bit, but through working through some of these things, which today we will go through, it's really good to catch ourselves out and bring us back to probably that present moment and really rationalise, which is easier said than done. Why do we catastrophize?
Yeah, it's a good question. So with a lot of these thinking traps, it's actually our brain thinking that it's being helpful when really we're like, this is actually not a helpful thing you're doing for us. So because we have to think in such a fast-paced environment, we have to constantly be analysing, making decisions, multitasking, and this is just getting more and more in the current climate. Our brain likes to take shortcuts, and so it will potentially think, okay, here's one situation, I'm going to jump to a shortcut of what might be the outcome of that without potentially stopping to look at all the different options. So it's gone, oh, I know this one, maybe it's going to be this terrible thing. The other thing, the other kind of cause or reason for this also is if we've got a bit of a tendency to be a bit more anxious, we can definitely find that we have more of these catastrophizing type thoughts because they're really associated with worry. So worry about the future, worrying about something going wrong. So if you've got a tendency and you know that about yourself, that you can be a little bit more of an anxious person, you're more likely to find these catastrophizing type thoughts.
Definitely. I've even found, through from my personal experience, and not sure if anyone else can relate to this, but as I've gotten older, I've become better maybe in tune with things too, being like, all right, I've had a big week, or, you know, I've been out on the weekend drinking and I'm a bit hungover. The next 3 days, I'm going to be I'm probably aware that I might feel a little bit shit, and just know that it's not me. It's actually just because I'm not in my best place at the moment. So I think that's actually helped me a little bit too, almost going like, I accept that I'm going to feel a little bit on edge over the next little bit because of these situations.
Yeah, 100%. I think that's a really good example and highlights how different factors can really increase our vulnerability to engaging in some of these thinking traps like catastrophizing. If you're not feeling your best self, if you're hungover, if you're tired, you know, you've got a new baby or something like that at home, then your mind is going to be much more in a place where it's likely to make these kind of snap judgments and decisions and lead you to jumping into that anxious kind of catastrophizing.
What's the $1 million question that everyone's sort of tuning in for is, what are the best ways to deal with this? How do we challenge the process of catastrophizing?
Yeah, good question. So I think step number one, we really have to recognise it. So we have to be a little bit more in tune with what's going on in our mind and what we're thinking, because a lot of the time our thoughts are really automatic and we don't pay a lot of attention to them. We're kind of just going along doing our thing. And so if we're catastrophizing but we're not really in tune with that, as I said, we could be like, why am I so anxious? Oh, it's because of this thought. So step one is kind of catching the thought. So catching the catastrophizing thought. Then step two is actually evaluating it. So how realistic is this thought? One of my favourite thought challenging type questions that you can ask yourself when you're trying to analyse some of your thinking is, okay, in this scenario, what's actually the most likely thing to happen? Like, what's the best case scenario? What's the worst case scenario? And what's the most realistic? So if you're, let's say, for your example, calling your mum and your brain's taking you to that place where you're like, oh God, like something's seriously wrong. She might not be okay. I would be like, okay, let's stop and be like, well, Dyl, what's the best case scenario? So in this scenario, and I'll put it to you.
Could be her phone's out of service or it's run out of battery.
Yep. What's the worst possible thing that could have happened?
She's probably dead.
Yep. And what's the most likely?
The fact that her phone's in her bag and she just doesn't hear it.
Yep. 100%. So we're just trying to add in a little bit more information, a bit more context, and start to challenge that a little bit, because for most of the time we're catastrophizing, the reality is that thought that we're having isn't particularly realistic or helpful. So we're like, let's just evaluate it a little bit. Am I really likely to end up in jail following one podcast episode not going as well as I'd like? Well,
no, but I completely agree. It's a great strategy, and I think one other thing that I was just evaluating that situation too. It's almost like, to get to that, you start asking those questions and you're like, well, how many times has she driven a car before and missed a call, and then she calls you and goes, oh, sorry, I missed your call. You know, that happens quite a bit.
100%. Yeah. How many times have you called your mum? I'm guessing.
Yeah.
Many. How many times has she been fine even when she hasn't answered the first time?
Yeah.
Well, every time, because, you know, she's still
here.
Yeah.
So the steps was recognise, evaluate, and then reframe your last thought. So we're going, okay, so we've recognised it. Now I'm going to check, you know, what's the evidence for this? You know, is this particularly realistic or not? And then you can come up with a new alternative thought for yourself if you like. So it's like, okay, actually, instead of, oh, something serious has probably happened, I'm going to go with, oh, she's probably left her phone in her bag again. Yep.
And then you can create a bit of a step for yourself. I'm going to call her again in an hour, give her a bit of time. Yep.
Because that situation is a bit dark, but it is relevant.
Yeah.
I was thinking putting it even to something that isn't as serious.
Yeah.
And your example before, you're talking about the podcast. So say, for example, you're thinking those things like, oh, okay, I do a terrible job, which you are not. You're doing a great job. My boss is going to see this, then they're going to sack me.
Yeah.
Because these are things that we all go through, and it's like catastrophizing. It doesn't actually matter what the situation is. Nearly the catastrophizing is just as bad no matter what it is.
Correct.
That situation, let's run through the recognise, evaluate and reframe for that.
Yeah. So step one obviously would be that I would need to kind of stop and be like, okay, I feel anxious. So anxious about coming here and doing the podcast. What's going on? What am I thinking? Then I would be able to recognise, okay, I'm having this thought around I'm going to get fired because I'm not going to do a good job.
Yeah, it's like I haven't done much of this before. Am I going to be doing a good job?
Yeah, 100%. So I've gone, okay, so that's kind of what I'm thinking. And then our next step would be to evaluate that thought. So it's like, okay, let's have a bit of a look at that thought. Okay, worst case scenario, yep, I could be really terrible. I guess I could be fired. I could never work again. I suppose if we take it to the
you could go to jail.
I could. What am I going to say? Okay, now I'm stressed. I could go to jail. Best case scenario, it goes really well. Everyone loves it. I get a raise, a promotion. Most realistic, most likely thing to happen, probably that it goes fine. It's not perfect, but my boss will probably be like, yeah, it was okay.
It's a good job. Yeah. Well, at the end of the day as well, like, you've been chosen to do this by this person. You have runs on the board of being a clinical psychologist. Yeah. You know your stuff. It's not like you've just rocked up and not know what you're talking about. So
100%.
It's a great exercise that I will definitely put in our takeaways of recognise, evaluating and reframe.
Yep.
A really good 3-step model to get through catastrophizing. Is there anything else that you do, or is that sort of the main step of that?
I think that's probably the main step. I definitely like almost what you just mentioned then, which is also then giving yourself the opportunity to recognise potentially your skills or what you're going to bring in that potential situation as well. Doesn't work for all situations, but it's definitely if you're worried about something work-related or even parenting-related, something like that, you can definitely go, okay, well, have I been in a similar situation to this before? How did it go? What were my skills in that situation? And then you can kind of, have that as a bit of something that you can go to. Like, as you said, I actually know a lot about thinking traps. It's, part of my job. I teach them all the time to other people. And then if I can kind of tell myself some of those things coming into the session, I'm going to be feeling more confident and less anxious.
Emma, thank you so much for today. Very, very cool learning about catastrophizing, which isn't cool when you're in it, but it is now that we've got our key takeaways of recognise, evaluate and reframe. Love that. Guys, let us know how you go, if you put this in practice, if it's helped you, and we'd love to hear back from you on that. Next episode, we will be talking about shoulding and musting.
Yes.
Not mustard.
No,
that wasn't even funny. Don't laugh about that one.
That was a pity laugh.
Okay, yeah, good. Can you give us a quick rundown on what shoulding and musting is for next week?
Sure. So shoulding and musting is something that we all do from time to time, and it's basically another way that we're kind of phrasing the way we're thinking. So I should go to the gym every day. I should always be paying 100% attention to my new baby, whatever it might be. And the shoulds and the musts, they have this ability to make us feel a lot of pressure. And then when we don't reach the standard we've kind of set for ourselves, we can also feel guilt. So that's kind of the general premise, and we can go into the details.
I know I'll be in that episode with you, but I'm looking forward to learning about that. So next episode, shoulding and musting. And thank you so much for tuning in today. Make sure you follow the Tackle Your Feelings program on Instagram too at TYF_AU, and check out the website at tackleyourfeelings.org.au to book your club into a workshop. And we'll see you next week.